Is your audio working okay? Good.
Good morning.
Good
Seems
morning.
to be. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Good morning.
Morning. So I'm going to let Jessica go ahead and introduce herself, and then we're going to jump into our usual conversation. As everybody knows who's been here before, we want this to be very involved in terms of being very collaborative and very engaging. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to ask the questions in the chat. Everybody else is going to be muted now, but you can ask questions in the chat, and then I'll address those questions with Jessica also. And we'll take it from there. So as always, it's meant to be a very engaging conversation in very real time. So Jessica, why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction of yourself and we can get started.
Yeah, sure. And let me start off by thanking you, Ken, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And I'm glad to see you expanding Sales and Marketing Leadership Alliance into Austin and the great state of Texas, which, you know, I might be biased because I'm a seventh generation Texan raised in Austin, which for most of you know, it's the capital of Texas and home of the University of Texas, which, did you know, is one of the largest employers in the state. Ironically, I did not go to school there. I did go to A&M, which presents some controversy with my family. But another fun fact for you is that Texas is home to 95 of the Fortune 500 companies. I had no idea. But when we talked on Monday, I started doing some digging to give you guys just some fun facts about the state and fun facts about Austin. So I've had a front row seat watching the city grow over the years. I think Mark James had indicated that a lot of Californians are looking to potentially relocate here. Luckily, the traffic is not so bad right now with the pandemic. One highlight, because the infrastructure is just not prepared for what we have already. 2.2 million people in Austin. And I would describe Austin as a progressive and entrepreneurial, full of diversity and soul, and at times has been referred to as the music capital of the world. Not so much right now. But for me, I've spent over 16 years with Dell and saw the ecosystem and supported the tech industry explode over the last 20 years here. We have a lot of companies with large presence in and around Austin, including Dell, obviously, Amazon, IBM, Apple, and those are on the tech side. And then Tesla, you've probably all heard, is going to be building a sizable auto assembly plant that'll employ about 5,000 people. So lots going on, lots of opportunity from my perspective. And there is a large startup presence as well. And it's exciting to see the innovation coming from those firms. In my career in recruiting, sales, learning and development, and marketing, in and around technology, I've been referred to at times as an intrapreneur. And I'm happy to say now I am an entrepreneur. So I pursued my passion 4 years ago for content marketing, executive branding, and created my own company that we called The Reality of When. And I have a small team, and we specialize in executive branding, emerging trends research, thought leadership, content development, and activation. And I'm honored to be talking with you and meeting this SML group of friends today.
Wonderful. Thank you for that great introduction. It's good to have that representation out there in Texas as well. And I've been amazed by over the last, really kind of 8 months or so, 9 months now, since I was starting to build up our presence out there, how many direct connections there are between Austin and San Diego. Not just people moving there for tax reasons and because of, just cost of living, those kinds of things, but from the business community, it's phenomenal in terms of the connections back and forth, which has been great. Can you give us, and I think a lot of people think of Texas as one ecosystem, right? But you have very distinct areas with Dallas and Houston and Austin, similar to California. Mm-hmm. People think it's either all Hollywood, LA, or it's all Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. They don't realize right. the diversity across the state. Can you give us a sense for what you're seeing out there in Austin and then in the other bigger cities also in response to COVID?
Yeah, so it's as far as business opportunities and the different industries represented, I would say that, Austin is made up of, a lot of government, types of entities. In fact, the state of Texas is the largest employer in the state. And then, you've got the University of Texas, and then you've got your tech here. I have a lot of clients in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I would say Dallas is experiencing a tremendous amount of growth, despite COVID. I think that we had talked a little bit about Houston. In Houston, from a population perspective, is what it's like the fourth largest city in the country. And they've got a lot of oil and gas, which is being challenged right now because of COVID. But don't lose faith, right? Hopefully, we've seen that industry rebound. But there's a lot of other industries in Houston as well. But every city feels different, right? I think Austin's pretty unique because it's kind of a melting pot of culture. And you've got a very, I don't know, it's entrepreneurial in spirit, even though you've got large corporations that have headquarters here.
Yeah. Well, I know in my 2 or 3 visits out to Austin also, I was really impressed, but also surprised by the number of startups out there. As you said, it's always been considered kind of the music capital of, or one of the maybe couple music capitals of the country. It's just incredible. But there are so many industries out there. It's so diverse, similar to really Southern California also, with so much happening out there. Well, so I'm curious, what are you seeing now? I mean, obviously the focus of today's conversation is around, kind of how do we get our teams ready, or our clients' teams ready? Are they really prepared for this new normal, or as Joanne Despodo said this morning, the new abnormal, which I love that phrase. That was great. But how are you seeing your clients, your peers out there, kind of adjusting and kind of trying to make good, if you will, with things being as tough as they are?
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel confident that the media is thoroughly covering the COVID-19 pandemic, and you guys are all very informed. I'm not certain how many of you are responsible for large scale organizations, but you certainly have clients who are. If you are not, it's kind of what I'm gathering. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to talk about the unemployment rate, and I'm not going to talk about the number of cases of the virus, or lives lost due to the virus, or this ongoing debate about return to school or return to sports or activities. But what I will say is, no question, our society is stressed. And I think you can probably see that in the way that people are interacting together, or interacting with each other. And I mean, my heart goes out to any of you who are experiencing any hardship right now. The reality is this fight is real. There are things in your life that you can plan for, and there are things that you can't. And in my career, in go-to-market functions, working for large companies, and now a small business owner with responsibility for 2 teenage girls, I've always believed that 10% of life is what happens to you, and 90% is how you respond. So for my clients, the big question I've been asking them is, at the end of 2020, what story do you hope to tell about how you responded in what I would call this time of chaos, or more politically correct, dynamic change, personally and professionally? Because the only way we remember and the way that we learn is through the stories that we tell. And then my challenge to my clients is, and even just peers and friends, it's what actions can you take now that'll put you in a position to live your best life and tell your best story.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I know that's obviously all about what you're doing as far as your business and helping these senior executives, a lot of them being very tech savvy, CTOs, CIOs, CXOs out there as well, helping them to figure out how to tell that story, whether it's internally for their existing team and to become better leaders, or even externally if they're in job search mode, or if they're trying to gain some more visibility, branding themselves also. How are they describing kind of what's happening internally? What are the things that are keeping them up at night? how are they grappling with trying to keep some cohesion among their teams and their organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually hosted a webinar about a couple of months ago with some leaders in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They're affiliated with this executive connections group. And they're cross-functional leaders. And what we were talking about was, how are you responding now? Because we know that we're in a position now to take immediate action. And honestly, if you don't take immediate action, you're going to end up sorely behind. And a lot of the things that they were communicating to me was, we are having to be more present now than ever before. And we've recognized that communication is important, but the right communication, frequent communication is key. And how do you do that, right? When you're used to having face-to-face engagement, an opportunity to express, your interests, your position, express, concern, and it's harder to do that remotely. What's interesting though, what I've found is, they're putting together support groups, they're virtual support groups in a lot of cases. But what they're also figuring out is they're getting to know their people better than they've ever known them before, which was kind of surprising, because I think a lot of people have had to rethink, what having a meeting looks like, because you're going to have interruptions. I mean, how many people have you seen have a dog in the background or a kid that comes up, unannounced when you're in the middle of a meeting? But they're trying to engage, their families and their, just to show their support. But it is tough though, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of FUD, right? Fear, doubt, and uncertainty that people are struggling through, because at the end of the day, your family and your health come first, and then figuring out how to ensure that you have livelihood, it's important as well.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I keep joking, who would have thought, 8 months ago, we would have been able to see into everybody's house, and whether you're a celebrity or a news anchor or a comedian, I mean, we all know what everybody's house looks like now, at least, 2 out of the 17 rooms if you're a celebrity. But yeah, no, you're right. It's a different kind of a interaction. So actually a couple of great questions from the group around technology and technologists, right? So you talk about that communication factor, and stereotypically, maybe not fair, but stereotypically, folks that are very tech savvy or engineering or science savvy, don't always have they're not usually their natural reaction is not to communicate, right? It's very linear, it's very focused, it's very detail oriented. So how do you coach your clients, and what do you see in terms of these technologists, these kind of brilliant engineer folks? How do they kind of enhance their own empathy? How do they improve their communication from an empathetic perspective versus being just so technical?
Yeah. So that I think that's, I mean, that's such a great question, because there are, okay, let me respond by saying this. So as working for Dell for such a long time, I don't know if many of you follow Michael Dell or not, but he's not the most engaging person. In fact, he had self-declared, he's very reserved. And so this pandemic for him, I think he was wearing a shirt that basically said that he's not a closet introvert. I mean, everyone knows that about him. So I think he's a good example of somebody who has had to come out in front of his people and show the human side, and show how how he is embracing his family, how he is talking to some of his employees' children. I mean, he read a book to kids on Zoom of employees, and just trying to show that softer side, because I think, again, those leaders that are traditionally technologists they aren't typically asking about the soft things. You know, they're very linear in thought. And I think that they're having to pause, and they're probably having to enlist support from their communications teams, to be really honest with you, and other cross-functional leaders who might excel at this, to understand ways that they can pivot, because they have to. They don't have a choice, because right now is a time, and time where you've got to show empathy. You've got to show humility to people, and at the end of this, because this time will too pass, right? People will remember how you treated them. People will remember how you led them through this period of time.
Yeah, and do you think it's going to alter, if you will, the types of people that get elevated into leadership positions, and or the way that leaders look to hire other people on their team also? If empathy and communication, which it really should have been part of the conversation, forever, but it certainly has become much more of a spotlight now. But do you think that's going to change going forward?
The best way to answer that, in my opinion, is reflecting on this time of chaos right now, and thinking about this way. We're at a crossroads, and some people may feel like they're at a dead end, right, of this path. So, as you reflect on this time and you look at how leaders responded, did they effectively manage and respond to this crisis? What actions did they take to engage and support their people? What changes did they make to accelerate some sort of rebound? Because that's critically important, right? So think about it: people, process, technology. How did they manage and evaluate the impact of changes that they made? And then what enhancements can they make to minimize disruption going forward? I mean, I think it's going to be more so, not how they were empathetic per se, but it's going to be more so a reflection of how they handled this particular situation, and learn from it as they go forward into this, next normal, right? Because I don't think anything about this is normal. And I don't think that, I don't think that everything is going to change, but I do think that we're going to have to embrace unexpected change going forward. And it's going to take a different leadership style to do that. And I think now we will start to see future leaders emerge, for sure.
No, I agree, definitely. And I think we're starting to see it also, even just on the recruiting that we do, where, again, communication skills was always part of the conversation, if you will, but now we're seeing that, moving up the list of priorities, if you will, on a job spec, right? So it's the ability to speak effectively and collaboratively across departments, right? So sales can't just talk to sales. Sales has to work with marketing, and marketing has to work with operations, and IT needs to work with sales. And that communication piece at the leadership levels is definitely becoming much closer to being at the forefront. And again, one of the key priorities. So a question for you: if we've all spent all this time in our careers building up our businesses and what have you, where empathy, either you had it or you didn't, right? It was kind of a natural thing. Either you were an introvert, extrovert, maybe you were empathetic or not. Can we teach that? Do you see, I mean, obviously you're in the business of coaching and helping people to see some of their blind spots, but can we teach somebody to genuinely be more empathetic in a way that doesn't come across as being disingenuous?
I think that people learn by example. And I think if you can demonstrate empathy and how impactful it can be, and share those stories with others, yes, but you can't force people to change. I mean, you can't force people to change. They they've got to figure out the benefit, the what's in it for me to some degree, which is kind of bad to say. But, I think that, they're going to figure out ways that they can shift their behavior, but it's got to be reinforced and it has to be supported, and they have to recognize the value that it's going to bring for their teams, for their clients even, because, the value expected from people, from consumers, from your colleagues, from your leadership team, it's changed. It's changed. And I did hear a kind of something funny. I can't remember the source of it, but if you yawn, and if somebody doesn't yawn in response, it's supposed to be a sign that they lack empathy.
I've heard that also.
If that's true, but I have heard that somewhere.
Exactly. No, it's true, and it's hard. It's. I mean, even as a somebody in the recruiting and search business for 22 years, it's really hard at times, especially with sales folks who are very good they're very good speakers, right? They're very energetic. They're very charismatic. It's tough to know for sure, are they truly being empathetic? Can they understand what's happening with their team? Or are they going to come in and kind of slash and burn and just, be difficult leaders? So it's definitely hard to kind of see through that at times. Well, I'm curious about whether or not, and this is a question that came up, I think, from Joseph also. Do you think that there'll be companies that will lose people because they have experienced very poor leadership through this pandemic? So people, their leaders have not been, empathetic. They have not been flexible or understanding of, kids or employees that are at home trying to teach their kids while also working and juggling different jobs. Do you think that people will start to lose team members because of that lack of empathy and lack of new leadership?
Yeah, I mean, it's an understatement to say that people are stressed right now.
Right.
And I think that, people will leave. They'll leave managers. I mean, you've heard that time and time again. People don't leave companies, people leave managers. And if they don't feel as if they are connected to some sense of purpose or that their work is appreciated, I can't imagine why they would be compelled to stay. I get it. People have to put food on the table. But at some times, at some certain times, you recognize that you need more out of, what you choose to do with your career. And so, I do think that you'll see people break out on their own, like I did. I mean, I didn't run from corporate. It's certainly a lot. It certainly feels good when you've got the direct paycheck and the that goes into your account every 2 weeks, and you've got your benefits that you don't have to worry about in most cases, and you've got cross-functional playground where you can learn a lot, meet a lot of great people. But when you really step back and ask yourself, what do I love about what I do? Do I like who I'm working for? And can I achieve what I want to achieve here? I think people are going to start asking themselves the hard questions, and quite honestly, find, I think, some bravery to go do something that they may not have taken the risk to do before.
No, that's a really good point, and it's a very good point. I think there's always analysis that's done post recession, post all these different downturns, and a huge number of entrepreneurs and companies that are very well known now, were startups that were kind of in someone's garage that they decided to go with full force during the last downturn, the last recession, whatever it may have been. So I agree. These kinds of downturns do tend to drive more entrepreneurialism and more kind of branching out. And I also think that, from what we see on the recruiting side also, I think that a lot of people, because now you can work from wherever. I think I call it this kind of grand social experiment in work from home is really starting to prove to be much, much more effective and productive than a lot of employers expected, right? And so now as a recruiter, I can recruit somebody from any place in the country. If they're going to be remote anyway, they don't have to be in the backyard of our client, right? And so we're trying to really kind of push that home with our clients. On the flip side, if you're a candidate, if you're an employee, you know, why would you work for a company that is in your own backyard with a bad reputation when you can now look at companies all across the country, those that are all considered best places to work? That's a much better option for you. And I think a lot of those folks will say, if I can't find for, I'm going to branch out and start my own business and see what I can find.
Well, and it comes down to loyalty too, right? So, and it's loyalty to people, loyalty to brands. I mean, in preparation for this, I was doing a lot of research, and I love McKinsey. I almost feel like I work for McKinsey sometimes because I like to share their research with everybody. But they've done some really great work around this notion of the next normal and post-pandemic, and you know what the leadership is required right now, like adaptive leadership, agile leadership. And one of the things that they were talking about, because if we've got sales and marketers here, the consumer behavior has drastically changed, and companies have had to figure out how to respond very quickly. And customer loyalty is on the line. So, to kind of flip it around and think about the challenge that these leaders are facing to figure out how to redefine that buyer's journey, to redefine how they, reach out to their customers and empathize with their customers and, support them through this time of challenge. That's going to be so important. And if you think about these brands, like you said, in the backyard that have a bad reputation, so customers that are yearning to see how the brands that they support, that they buy product from, are treating their people. And apparently that's become a really big ticket item lately. And there's a lot of encouragement to start to showcase those stories about how you are taking care of your people and how you're taking care of your customer in this time of need. Because I think, from a seller's perspective, right? I grew up in sales, went marketing. The customer, they are in a position right now where they don't need you to sell to them. They need you to talk with them. They need you to share insights with them. They need to hear from you what other customers in different industries are doing differently to manage through this change. So, I think there's a lot to say about, the loyalty internally and externally, because if you can't get your people to advocate for your brand, you're gonna have a hard time convincing customers why they should do business with you. That's just my 2 cents.
No, that's a really good point. And we've seen examples of things that companies have done very well in the pandemic, and they've really kind of been applauded for it, right? Then you have little kind of innocuous things like I've read recently about KFC, right? And people got really upset about the fact that they kept their commercials on air when they're talking about finger licking good, right? And they were saying how it's really
they can't lick their fingers, right?
Yeah, it's kind of tone deaf right now, right? Or I see commercials now for different things where actually there's a disclaimer at the bottom that says, filmed pre-COVID, because it's showing people being together and celebrating at a party and doing whatever. And you think, wow, who would have thought that would have to be part of your branding to make sure that you're not coming across as being tone deaf, right? So it's what you're saying is exactly right. It's a customer issue as well as an employee issue for sure. Definitely. So back to the piece about technology. So, and again, because a lot of your clients are senior technologists and very brilliant people, there's been such an acceleration of technology. I mean, look at all of us right now this morning on the Zoom call, right? Who would have thought we'd have this many people on Zoom 6 months ago, right? If you guys have been following Zoom as a stock, I mean, they went from 10 million subscribers to over 320 million in the course of 3 months. I mean, think about that kind of growth for any of our businesses. That's an awful lot to try to absorb and digest and react to. So I'm curious about what you're seeing and maybe what you're coaching your clients to do in terms of how they handle this insane acceleration of technologies for their businesses and for their teams also.
Yeah, so I do a ton of research work with my clients. as we build out, their kind of thought leadership platforms to make sure they're talking about not just their business and their company, but what's going on related to emerging trends, whether that be technology, leadership, or other things. And right now, the big ticket item that everyone has been faced with is adoption of digital technologies. And we've been hearing about digital transformation forever, cloud technologies forever. But we've also heard that there's a lack of adoption, slow adoption. People don't want to change, and digital brings disruption. Well, I think that my clients are looking at this digital disruption, and they're kind of shocked and amazed at how quickly their teams and their customers have shifted because they had to. And I think that as we go forward, they'll leverage lessons learned from that adaptability that their teams demonstrated in this time, and look to, to get closer to the customer, additional digital to get closer to your people. Collaboration is going to be key internally and externally. So there's a lot of, great technology out there to evaluate. There's also this notion of cognitive, which includes anything, AI, we hear this artificial intelligence, and we hear, about machine learning. There's this big debate about it. Is it ethical? Is it not ethical? Well, we're going to have insights about our people, insights about, our customer, appropriate insights, right? Nothing that crosses the privacy boundary, so that we can make smarter, more educated, and faster decisions. So I think that those are going to be big ticket items right now, and they're going to need to look for a diverse group of talent to be able to support that. And that's across all functions, not just in technology. It's going to be in marketing and sales too, because you're going to have people that know how to package that up and how they can take it to market. And I think that you're going to also have to leverage those people, because those are the ones that have the voice of the customer, and make sure that you've got bi-directional communication with those leaders and those people, so that you're making sound decisions. And like you said, you're not tone deaf as you go forward. Because, again, I go back to McKinsey because I love what they do for their research, but they're talking about, marketing and salespeople have had to get really focused right now and look at buying signals and buying patterns now, and shed everything else and just stay focused. So that way, they're actually meeting these new needs of clients, right? New needs of their people. And I think technologies definitely, I think that a lot of companies were stressed, and they were tasked, because we went within a matter of weeks. So I think on March 25th, over 180 million people in the United States were working from home. And organizations don't have the infrastructure to support that. They have an infrastructure to support 10 to 15% of their people working from home, not 90, 95%. So you had, there was a ton of disruption in how you could communicate, get online, get access to your data. And then I have a client who's a chief information security officer. So don't even get me started on cybersecurity right now, because that's a whole nother topic of conversation and concern, because you've got people on their home networks who have access to corporate networks, and they're being targeted specifically to see if they can, get hackers can get into their corporate environment, which is scary, right? But there's just a lot of things that leaders are having to consider, and I think some of them are really good, though. I think but looking at the skill sets required, I'd be curious to see what you guys see change as far as what skills are needed, and then and what capabilities are needed in those roles to be able to accelerate continued adoption of digital and cognitive technologies. And then, oh, by the way, in order to do it quickly, are you going to upskill your current talent, or are you going to go acquire talent?
Right, exactly. Well, and if the talent pool that you're pulling from is the same talent pool that you've been accustomed to, and yet the necessary skills have changed, right, and the ability to sell online versus face-to-face has changed, then the question becomes, how do we get the people trained up in this new reality, which is tough also. And that's a big part we're seeing out there is, I'm on the board of the Inside Sales Professionals organization. And, there's a big focus now about inside sales really not overtaking outside sales, but becoming an even more important and integral part of that sales process, right? Because the outside sales team, they're stuck in the office as well. And so now they're collaborating with and working alongside of the inside sales folks, and salespeople in general have got to get more comfortable, if you will, with selling and pitching and educating their clients, virtually as opposed to being in person. But back to your point before, I want to touch on this again, is the voice of the customer. You don't have the ability to be in front of your customer, right? And you can only read so many cues and body language through a virtual call or virtual pitch. And so how do we train our sales and our marketing folks to understand what the customer is truly saying, what they're meaning, how are they going to decide to buy your product or not? That's a long-term, I think, challenge that we're all going to be up against. And I know that you came out of the learning and development world early on in your career, right?
Yeah.
So, that's got to be among your former peers out there. That's got to be a big topic of conversation, I would think.
Yeah, it is, and I think it always has been. Because I always go back to, and it sounds overly simplified, but you get a meeting with who you sound like. So if you're talking to a CEO and you start to ask them tactical questions about their data center, they're probably going to go introduce you to Johnny down the hall, who's responsible for the data center. So if you are looking at learning and development, and if you're talking about sales enablement even, I'm a big believer that you got to figure out what it is the customer values and what the customer cares about. And if you want to simplify it, figure out how they're paid, because that's a way to have a very quick conversation and understand how you can create a mutually beneficial relationship. And I say that all the time, but there's a lot of times when, people in a sales or marketing capacity, they don't really look at what it is the customer can gain from them, and vice versa, and what they can offer to them. I did a lot of executive events when I was in marketing, and we would get a list of who was going to be at these big events, which, oh, by the way, have been canceled lately. And I would bring executives with me, and I would be shocked to see how quickly they went to pitch. And whether you're on the phone or you're in person, I think the one thing you need to keep in mind is consider what the customer values, and oh, by the way, how can you build a mutually beneficial relationship? Don't start asking for business unless you've earned the right and opportunity to do so. And then from a learning and development perspective, you're going to have to help these people practice. So I'm a big believer in role play, and I'm a big believer in building realistic scenarios for people to practice. It makes people really uncomfortable to do that, but I promise you, you're better for it. And I think we need to look at opportunities where, inside sellers, they've got their skill sets. You've got your outside sellers who have their skill sets. They're all enabled, you hope, right, with the right marketing materials to talk to their customers. But I think all of those groups are going to have to work even closer together to make sure that as they approach the customer, that they keep those things in mind. And, I built out a CXO, I called it a CXO Insights program for one of our VPs of sales when I was at Dell. And it was an acquisition team. And they're like, how are we going to we're having a hard time getting meetings. And it came down to figure out what the customer values, how they get it paid, talk about those topics, share with them research, read this. I'm a big student of reading. Read Harvard Business Review. They're probably reading this. Find some articles. You don't have to be the expert. Find a book on change management. Like, here's another one. People Before Things, written by a former CEO or CIO, Chris Laping. Figure out what you might be able to say to them. And then, oh, by the way, how can you package that up in practice? And learn from, because you're not going to be perfect, but learn from those opportunities you've been given to practice so that you can, improve your performance. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
It's well put. No, very, very, very accurate and very on point also from what I see out there as well. We had a really good, interesting question from Debbie also, and I think it speaks to what you were just talking about. And it's with regard to generations, right? I'm not sure what the kind of the age range is of the folks that you're coaching or that you're working with these days, but are you seeing a difference in terms of adaptability or in terms of receptivity to these changes that varies among generations?
Well, I think we all know the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I would argue there are leaders that are certainly leveraging the playbooks from the past and how they're approaching their approach right now. And I don't know that they're all going to be able to adapt. And I don't know that they're going to be able to support the agility that's needed to accelerate, things, strategies, tactics, actions that they need to take now to be prepared for the future. I see, emerging leaders who are a lot more engaged and have a little more appetite to learn. And I think those people you'll see start to move to the forefront. And I honestly, people are accelerating. I heard this on the news, accelerating their retirements. Because some people that have been in this business for a long time, they don't want to change.
No, it's a very good
worked
point.
For them. Yeah, it's worked for them in the past. And I read a book a long time ago called Tribes by Seth Godin. It's a super quick read, but it was interesting. One of the things that they said, and I use this example all the time, so people, if anybody knows me on this call, has heard this from me before. So is your organization or is your leadership team operating as a thermometer? So taking the temperature from the inside the organization, or are they operating as a thermostat? So dialing the temperature, lower or higher based on the outside climate. And I think that speaks to some leadership styles that are going to be under, scrutiny going forward, and will make a difference in what companies excel and what companies don't.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. I completely agree. And again, it kind of goes back to what you said in the beginning about, controlling your career, right? Again, whether it's the career, your personal career, or the folks around you, or your team, or, the clients, those kind of things. But again, are you just kind of taking your temperature to see what's happening, or are you actually controlling and adjusting accordingly based on what is happening around you, which I think is a great point to bring up. One question that came up actually from a couple of folks was asking you to kind of clarify something. You said earlier that, people need to make sure that they're asking for business that they deserve, right? And not, and making sure from a pitch perspective that you're actually doing a good job. Can you maybe clarify that, or any examples of that with your clients where they did a good job of asking for the kind of business that they deserve to ask for?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. So when I met the CIO for Eli Lilly at an event, and he was on our acquisition target list for 10 years, would not take a call. Granted, we had an advantage because we were in a social setting. I don't know how you recreate that type of social setting right now. You got to get really creative. But, I had a person with me who's actually one of my mentors now. He was our chief innovation officer, and not everybody can be as smart as this guy. He's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. But his name is Jim Psych Leather, and within the conversation that he was having with this CIO from Eli Lilly, he turned to me and said he's invited me to come and speak to his direct staff about innovation. Really? Within 5 minutes, that's what happened? That's excellent. And the conversation, you know, only thing I could chalk it up to was he understood what the CIO of Eli Lilly was struggling with and offered up, you know, his you know, service to come in and talk to his team. We didn't have a foot in the door before that, and we certainly did after that. But, you know, I think it's you're just asking the questions, doing the research. So how many times have you seen a seller go in cold with no background, no information? They don't understand the business. They use the question of, help me understand your business. There's so much data out there on the World Wide Web right now that there's no excuse for not being prepared. I get that people have quotas to hit. You know, you've got meeting targets, you've got pipeline meetings, and, you know, you're trying to move fast and furious and get to the next deal, but you got to be really careful and remember, these are people. And so when you think about deserving a meeting, have you earned the right to ask for a meeting? Have you done your homework, right? Have you done your due diligence? You know, I have one of my clients used to work for IBM, and he's the CISO client I have now. And he told me that he had somebody from IBM send him a meeting request with no information, had no clue he used to work there. He took the meeting just as a learning opportunity for whatever reason. And had the person done their due diligence, they would have known he worked for IBM for a number of years. They would have known his level of expertise, because basically the guy was trying to sell him the portfolio that he built when he was there. So it just was, you know, it just kind of shows you that there's a lot of bad behaviors that can be easily corrected. And by the way, you can go buy the data, right? You can buy it. You know, there's a group called Boardroom Insiders, and they'll give you a 4-page report on anybody you want within a leadership role. So just do your homework, right? Just don't walk in there blindly and expect that they're going to want to invite you to Thanksgiving, because they don't want to invite you to Thanksgiving. They don't know if they like you yet. So I think it's, you know, do your homework, do your due diligence, and figure out the best way to approach them based on what you think you can offer a value to them. And sometimes you have to ask, but don't go in there and ask them blindly about, you know, tell me about your business and what keeps you up at night. It's just not, you know, it's probably not well received, especially in the climate we're in right now.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. And I think it also that same kind of litmus test, if you will, can be and should be applied in reverse too. I mean, if you have a potential customer coming to you and asking you about your services, you know, do they do their own due diligence? Do they do their homework? Do they deserve to be part of your select client base, right? I know we all want business, especially these days where things are a little bit slower for a lot of us. But at the same time, you know, that's a litmus test that I use also. Does this person that's calling me up to use my services have any idea what I do? Are they calling me for IT recruiting when it's pretty obvious on my LinkedIn profile and my website that we don't do IT recruiting, right? Do they deserve to be a client, right? And so I think it certainly can and should be applied to both sides of that. A question.
Right. And oh, sorry. No, I just was going to say, you know, when I went out on my own, I have never been so busy. And I was busy with a lot of people who I felt like there's a high percentage of people that would reach out and try to find out what I could do for them. And I found myself inundated with, because I'm kind of a people pleaser. Don't tell anybody, but you know, I'd like to help you any way that I can. But then what I learned was they were really, really quick to take advantage of my willingness to help. And you can't pay the bills that way. So, there's a select group of friends I'm super happy to do that with and spend some time. But if you don't feel any reciprocity, it's going to get taxing, and you're going to find your way out of that relationship at some point in time. So.
No, I agree. Yeah. And then it's more difficult to try to unwind it later on, and you're kicking yourself for taking it on in the first place. So and I totally agree. So actually, so speaking of the word unwind, so one other thought came to mind was, all these changes and tactics, if you will, and strategies, whether it's hiring or what have you, or just leadership development, some might look at it as kind of a short-term stopgap. This will get us through the next, whatever it is, 6, 8, 9, 12 months until we have a vaccine, until we have some kind of a change or whatever it might be. And then at that point, we'll go back to quote unquote, the old normal. How do you, and again, with your clients being very linear and very technology savvy, how do they, or do they feel like this is going to be a temporary situation and they're looking for short-term ways to address it with the expectation that they're going to unwind this, let's say the end of 2021? Or are they permanent changes that are with us to stay regardless of a vaccine or no vaccine?
I think what I have seen from them is, quick response in the now, because they had to figure out how to minimize disruption to business. I think the process that they're going through, as I understand it, is identifying of the things that have changed, right? Because again, this was unforeseen change that we're going through right now. Which of those things have actually increased productivity? Which one of those things, do we think has helped accelerate performance in one area or another of the business? I think you're going to have to reflect on the things that make sense to keep. Now, I think one of the examples they give me is, you've got these executives who have, 300,000 miles on American Airlines, and they're on a plane, 275 days a year or whatever it is, to go have 3 meetings. Why would they do that? Mm-hmm. But it wasn't socially acceptable in the past to say, I'm going to go meet a leader of this business in Germany, and we're going to have a 1-hour meeting, and but can we do that virtually? The answer was socially acceptable. It's not socially acceptable to do that. And now I think it is. Yeah, I think those things for sure, they'll rethink the efficiencies, the impact on productivity, the impact on money spent, and I think decide, what to keep, and then, what to change.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, everything from, real estate is obviously being, rethought, how that's going to work out. Co-working space. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a leader actually last week, was saying that, a year from now, we could see the majority of co-working spaces occupied by, by individuals that have their own business or that are employed somewhere else, but they just need time away mm-hmm. from their home, right? Because everybody's working from home now, but there's all these distractions. The kids are going to be there working, doing all their schoolwork for at least the first semester, first half of the school mm-hmm. year. And you might have, mm-hmm. 2 spouses, a married couple that have a co-working space, and they go out and they do it mm-hmm. in shifts to get away from the home office. So, I mean, things could really change dramatically over the next, 12 to 24 months. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I hope we go back to the days where, we shake hands and feel confident about it. I mean, I'll tell you firsthand, I had my first, face-to-face business meeting a couple weeks ago in the flesh. And I got to tell you, it was weird. I mean, I didn't realize my clients were such huggers still. I'm like, where have you been? Who have you been meeting with? Have you been keeping a social distance, and have you been exposed? Like, do I need to start walking around with thermometer to check your temperature to see if I should have dinner with you? Because there's no social distancing at a table in a restaurant. I mean, remember back when we went to dinner or for lunch to talk right. about what you were doing with SMLA? I mean, there's no 6 feet. It's not possible. And what risk are you willing to take? So I do hope we go back, because I'm a big believer in handshakes. I do like hugs from time to time. And I do not want to have to wear a mask for very long.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's just not normal. I mean, think back to the days when you would be on a flight, and I don't know if we have anybody on the call that's from China, but I mean, I would see people on the plane with masks on, and I would immediately want to distance myself from them, because I thought it was creepy. Like, why would you do that? I had to bedazzle face shields for my daughter. We went to St. Thomas, and the scariest part about the whole trip was getting on the plane. So we, bedazzled face shields so that we could borderline suffocate on the way there. But anyway, I think that, again, leaders are going to have to reflect, keep what's working, because I think there's going to be some surprises, and then reinforce the behavior change that, you think's going to help your company be more agile going forward. Because I think that's going to be the name of the game from a competitive perspective, because I think people are shocked at how adaptable their teams can be and how agile they can become. So I think there's going to be a lot more to say about this.
Those are great points. Yeah, I completely agree. I agree that, a lot of leaders have been surprised at how effective and productive their staff have continued to be, even though they can't see them because they're working from home all the time, but they've been very productive, which has been, I think, a silver lining, if you want to call it that. I agree. So in the last couple of minutes that we have here, any thoughts, kind of parting words around what you might recommend to the group this morning in terms of, if they are a leader, things that we should be doing to kind of engender ourselves with our staff, or if we have clients then we're consulting with or working with leaders on our customers, things that we can certainly recommend or address with them just to make the organization itself and them as a leader more effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to customer centricity. It's going to be more important than ever. Understand the change in the consumer behavior, gain insights into what they value. How does it impact their buying behaviors? Accelerate your adoption, if you haven't already, digital and cognitive technologies. At a leadership level, though, I still firmly believe that, I have this story I wanted to tell you, and I'll make it very brief, but I had gotten a book from, and I love books, so this Steve Forbes. I'm a big fan of Steve Forbes, and I'm not trying to be political at all, I promise. But it's called Power, Ambition, and Glory. And so when you think about leadership, I think one of the things that I had mentioned early on was that there are some leaders who resist change. But he talks about ancient leaders like Alexander the Great and their motivations. And we will see emerging leaders. And that's why we write history, so that we can learn from history and then make it better, right? Make the world a better place. But one of the things that I had an opportunity to get this book autographed by him at a conference, but then I had an opportunity actually to do a project with him when we were doing some Forbes research. It's like totally one of the highlights of my entire life. But the basis of the book, though, I was intrigued to learn and to share with others. And I'm gonna read this quote and that he wrote in the intro. It said, leaders in today's corporate world pursue the same goals that energized their ancient counterparts: wealth, accomplishment, recognition, and prestige. They are motivated by the same things: power, ambition, and glory, and often use the same tactics to achieve that. And further states, what is certain is that as we advance into the 21st century, the parameters of power will be changing around us, and our place in the world will be redefined with or without our compliance. And I thought that was pretty powerful, because you have to accept that change is the only thing that is a certainty. And you got to build the tools for yourself, and you got to build the tools for your team. You have to model those behaviors in order to help them through these times of uncertainty.
And Jessica, what was the name of that book again? I'm sorry.
Power, Ambition, and Glory.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll send you a list of some of these books that I've been reading, because I also think that from a leadership perspective, people are probably doing a lot of self-reflection. There's other ones called The Purpose Path, written by Nicholas Pierce, who I think he works for McKinsey. Sorry, I love McKinsey. You get a job there. And then this People Before Things book. Chris Laping's amazing. Again, he just recently left the CIO position at. But I've met him several times, and this is on change management, but it's about putting your people first. So it's a pretty impactful, practical guide to things to consider. And then there's just so much material out there right now, articles I'm reading left and right in preparation for helping my clients through this time and help them build their stories about what they did during this time. But if anybody wants any of those links, I'm happy to share what I know.
Great, thank you.
What I've
That's
learned.
wonderful. Very good. Thank you very much. All right, good. So, so that's going to do it for this morning. A couple quick things. First of all, our next speaker we have lined up. There's no more topics for this month. I'm going to actually be on a long road trip, driving my son out to Indiana University. So I will see you all back here in September. But I want to say that on the 9th of September is our next event. And then at the end of September, we actually have a regional sales manager who's based out in Austin with DoorDash. She's going to be our speaker at the end of September. It should be really cool. So John Ford, who is our chapter president in Austin, introduced me to Amanda. So that's the end of September. Also, again, success trios, if you want to be involved in one, they're a huge value. As you saw this morning, those of you that did our virtual session early on this morning, the success trios are a fantastic way to make connections. So please let us know about that. And I also want to thank Teresa Thomas this morning. Again, I know we couldn't see her, but she was definitely there, obviously, and great for her business and spotlight also. So if you have any suggestions or recommendations for us, by all means, we're all ears. Just let me know or let Elaine know. And with that, we will sign off, and I hope you all have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you in September. Thanks, Jessica.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.